Playoff field has dwindled down to 4 teams. And I guess as Cubs fans, we all look and say, why aren't we involved? But when you look at those 4 teams, there's a ton of really good baseball players, star players, including really 3 of those teams where you look and you go, hey, they went out and they spent the money and they're getting the results right now. I want to talk about Tom Ricketts' letter to Cubs season ticket holders, the Cubs salary cap going into next season, and what it's going to take for the Cubs to be one of those 4 teams that are playing at the end of the season. And how far away are we from getting there? And is the leadership moving things in the right direction? All that and more right here on the Cubs Baseball channel. Like and subscribe. Give us a thumbs up. Get in the comments section, and let's go. Hey, Cubs fans, Mick Gillespie, thanks for hanging here on the Cubs Baseball channel as we roll through the offseason. I'm at Broadcaster Mick, and you can find us. We are available on some of the socials at Broadcaster Mick on Twitter. I guess we call that X now. I'm still having an issue going from Twitter to X, but it's easier to get to when you just hit the X button, right? Also, Instagram and TikTok, and we appreciate you being here to talk baseball today as we roll through the offseason. Now, first off, the playoff has dwindled down to 4 teams. We're in the championship series to win the pennant, and it's no surprise that the Yankees and the Dodgers are in that mix, right? I mean, we knew kind of coming in, I picked the Yankees and the Dodgers to be in the World Series at the beginning of the season, and that could very well happen. And I think baseball would love that just because think of all the people that would have to watch, right? Ohtani against Judge for the championship, but we'll find out if it gets there because they still have a couple series left. And it could be a Subway series because the Mets are the other team in the National League. So the Mets, they were spurred on by Grimace, the McDonald's purple character, and then they'll be playing the Dodgers and then the Yankees and Cleveland. So that's the matchup. Cleveland's the team I look at and go, probably the least likely of these 4 teams to win the World Series. And it's because I look at it and say, hey, they got good players, but they don't have the star power that the other teams have. And that kind of led me to what my whole offseason has been, just looking at the Cubs after another finish where they went 83-79, second straight year. And they spent money and they made moves, but it didn't really feel like any of those moves made sense. I mean, going back to and looking at this roster, when they went and signed a long extension for Ian Happ and then went and gave $177 million to Dansby Swanson, and these are supposed to be players that you build your team around. And they feel like they're good players, but they don't feel like for Happ, he's consistent. Now, he's a Gold Glover, might win another one out there. You know, his defense has been pretty good. And when he has big games, I mean, don't take anything away from him. He has enormous games, and he carries the team from time to time to wins. I mean, his big games are big. But then there's also, 4 or 5 days where he really doesn't make an impact in the lineup, and how do you do that? Well, what you do is you just get other players that make an impact on those days, and you hope that you get those really big games from him, and they pay off. Well, with Dansby Swanson, the power production's down. They've got him signed for a long time, and it just doesn't feel like to me that he's one of the best shortstops in baseball because you got to put the bat in there too. And I mean, you're paying him to hit. So the Cubs could be looking at another Jason Hayward type contract unless something drastically changes. Maybe he just had a bad offensive year and he's going to bounce back. But I think there's a lot of concern when it comes to that contract because of all of the other contracts that are accumulated around this diamond. And then you have all these young players that are supposed to be coming up from this farm system that at one point was the number 2 farm system in all of baseball. And they're all stacked up in AAA now, the Matt Shaws and the James Triantoses and the Owen Caseys. I mean, I can sit here and name all those guys that are going to need big league playing time. There just isn't a spot for them. So what does that mean? Well, the Cubs need a lot of help with the bullpen. And I think that is an easy, really an easy statement to make. And it's been year after year, really, since Wade Davis was the closer, an area where you kind of felt nervous about what the Cubs are going to bring to the table in that area. Now, when you look at what the Cubs have as far as money to spend, they're going to have, according to the calculations that I made, and I look, it's in the area because there's a lot of things that factor into this, but maybe around $70 million under the cap. What happens if Cody Bellinger opts out? There's a chance that he's going to opt out. I think it would be a good thing for the Cubs if Bellinger opts out, just because what happened during the course of the season is that Bellinger lost his center field job to Pete Crow Armstrong, and then Michael Busch played first base. So those were his two spots. So you play a little first, play a little outfield, but unless you move somebody else, which your corner outfielders are also signed, and we've talked about this ad nauseum on here, there really just doesn't feel like there's a spot for him. And of course, Craig Counsell likes to use the DH as almost like a day off for some of these guys, right? Or maybe with the DH, that's how you start to incorporate the Owen Caseys into the lineup. That's how you get Matt Shaw. But they're going to take their lumps, you would think anyway, when they move from AAA to the big league. So the Cubs are going to be in a spot where they've got money under the cap. They need to get out there and add some pitching. And there's no doubt about it. They need a closer. And possibly they'll have some more money if Cody Bellinger opts out. And I think it's a decision for Bellinger right now. And it's based on how weak the center field position is in this year's free agent market. I mean, and you look through and you're going, what guys do you feel like could make an impact at the center field spot? And I mean, the list is just so thin. You're talking about the likes of guys like Harrison Bader, Michael A. Taylor, and then are you going to go out and spend for Juan Soto? I mean, he might get $700 million, according to a lot of the experts. And I'm guessing that the Yankees may pay that. I don't know if it's going to be that high, but he's expecting to get a huge payoff. And I doubt that he'll leave New York. But for Cody Bellinger, teams like the Phillies are looking for some outfield help. There's going to be other teams that'll be in there. We'll see. I mean, there's been rumblings that maybe he didn't feel like hitting in Wrigley was great for him last year. His numbers certainly reflect that. And for the Cubs, you could definitely use that money to go somewhere else. I still think he's a good player, but I don't know that he's the star player that he's being paid to be. And I think the Cubs need a star player. They need somebody that's going to come in there and help lift them to the next level. I think the other part of this roster, if it was me, and I was kind of surprised that they didn't make moves on guys like Patrick Wisdom to just get young players experience once they fell out of the playoff race, but he was on the roster till the end. I'm sure that they're going to look at this at some point and feel like, hey, we need to get some of these guys experience. Now, the other area here, and I've said this before, and I'm going to say this again, I don't know anything. So, don't look into my statement and say, hey, man, Mick knows. I don't know. I'm just saying, if it's me and it's my money and I end up with the same record, I go out, I fire my manager, and the way that David Ross was fired upset a lot of people that were working with the Cubs last year because he was a very popular guy. And you make that move because you feel like the team's supposed to get better and they have the same exact record. But you're paying the manager now more than you've ever paid any manager before. We're seeing a lot of moves as far as the coaching staff goes. Willie Harris is the latest coach, the third base coach, who's not going to be back with the team. Our friend Jim Adducey being one of those as well. And others, though, and that's the way it goes. And I'm sure that Counsell wants to have more of his people around and try to mix it up a little bit. I don't think that Willie did a bad job at third base, but I mean, it's just the way that it goes. With that said, though, if I'm Tom Ricketts, I'm looking at the direction of this thing and I'm going, after 2016, it's not like Jed Hoyer wasn't a part of what was going on in the organization. And I know there was some tough decisions to be made. Did you really want to get rid of the core four? Were those guys going to eventually figure it out? And eventually the Cubs got rid of them. And some of those guys have not figured it out. I mean, you look at the Tigers' run this year, they got better when Javi Baez wasn't on the teams. I mean, think about that. And we love Javi Baez. Chris Bryant's been hurt a lot. Anthony Rizzo has a chance to win a World Series with the Yankees, but he's dealing with, back injuries, concussions and stuff. It's really been, kind of sad, honestly, to see that the way that those guys' careers have gone down, just because we figured they would be Hall of Famers. They'll be Cubs Hall of Famers one day, but not Major League Baseball Hall of Famers. But, since then, it was like, well, we're not going to tear it all the way down. We're going to try to compete as we build. And this year, and I thought that this was a really telling statement. I figured that the Cubs would be contenders, and I never really felt like, to be honest with you, they were, and neither did the every day when you look at fan graphs, and they were always a long shot to make the playoffs, let alone win the World Series. But Tom Ricketts said in his annual letter to season ticket holders that this could be maybe the toughest season of his tenure. And I think that him saying that is really indicative of what he wants, and he wants to win. And I know that he takes a lot of criticism from some of our fans, some of you guys that are watching right now. I know Tom, I know how competitive he is. I know what kind of guy he is, and I know what kind of leader he is. And he's a great guy, and I know what he's doing. He's going to hire somebody. He's going to let them do their job. And that's what's happened. And he's let Jed Hoyer do his job, and it just hasn't resulted in the outcome that I'm sure you'd want to have. You look at the Dodgers, even before they had Shohei Ohtani, even before they had the Mookie Betts, they were still a perennial playoff team. The Cubs, they have a decent roster, but they're an 83-79 team, slightly better than 500. And last year, a disappointing end. This year, a disappointing middle of the season, and really cosmetic work to get to that record, but not where I'm looking and I'm going, hey, this team has a chance. Now, I don't know. My gut feeling is if there's anything that's going to happen as far as changing the direction of the front office, that it'll happen after the World Series. I could see that happening, or maybe they're satisfied with a 1 year, what some people would call a lame duck season for Hoyer and his front office, where they say, hey, he signed. They did it for Joe Madden. We knew the year before that Joe Madden wasn't going to come back. I think a lot of us felt like that. You could tell that there was definitely a difference of opinion in some of the things that he was doing and some of the things that I'm sure the front office would want him to do. And I think we're kind of at a point now where if you give him another season, what happens if you make the playoffs and you don't win the World Series? What if you don't really contend for the World Series and you make the playoffs? Do you get an extension based off of that? So the expectations are for him to really be able to, Hoyer and really in company, to be able to have job security. They're going to have to hit a grand slam when it comes to the season. And how are they going to do that? Well, they're going to do that by spending money. Do they have the money to go out and sign Corbin Burns, who I think would be a welcome addition to this rotation? And a guy that you would slot right there at the beginning. This team needs stars. They have the backup singers. Now they need the lead singers. They need the guys that are going to go out there and basically come up with the big hits when you need big hits that teams have to game plan around. And because I don't feel like that roster right now is set up that way. Are you willing to go out and spend $700 million on Juan Soto? I mean, we saw the Dodgers with like basically rolled up a truck to get Shohei Ohtani, but look at what he's done. He has lived up to the national brand that they paid for. So, with all of that said, I look at things right now and I wonder, did the Cubs go after a Pete Alonso? And if you did, then what about Michael Busch? Are they going to be willing to part ways with, second baseman Nico Herer? Because they have a bunch of guys in the minor leagues that could play second base. I don't know if they'd be as good as Nico, but it's not like Nico's putting up the power numbers. He's great defensively. He's great in the clubhouse. You can build around him, but he's a piece. He's not a star, right? So do you make a move there? Would you get value? Could you go out and start building a bullpen based on money and also getting rid of some of the guys? Isaac Paredes, you trade it to get at the deadline, hasn't really lived up to it so far with the Cubs. That could change. he was kind of known as one of the best third basemen in the game and an all-star, but he hasn't played like that for the Cubs. Would that change? Are you willing to, to sit on that, or would you move him out and use some of these young guys in that position or whatever? I mean, I just feel like there's so many unanswereds with this front office and this organization. And when I hear ownership saying, hey, this is one of the most disappointing seasons that I can remember, and there were some disappointing seasons in there, it comes down to this. Tom Ricketts bought the team, okay? Then he had Jim Hendry front office 1 year. I like Jim a lot. He didn't feel like Jim was going to be the guy for him. He goes out, he gets Theo Epstein. Theo comes in and immediately tears everything down. He gives him the leeway to do that. And some owners won't, but he did. And you got to stomach losing because the Cubs were terrible. And then all of a sudden, scouting did a good job of going out and picking up the Chris Bryants, making the decisions to get the Javi Baez's and those guys, Kyle Schwarber and all them. And then eventually you make the Rizzo trade, you go out, you sign John Lester, you start to put this roster together, and then you get to the World Series in 2016. It's all worth it. The problem is that it just didn't stick long term, and it has been disappointing. It was disappointing that you see the Astros, who didn't make the World Series, but they're back in the playoffs again, and you still have Jose Altuve and guys like him that have kept the winning tradition, the expectations for the organization, and the Cubs really just haven't had that. And it was like, hey, we won the World Series and now everybody's satisfied. So you got to get all the way back to it. And it's felt like the last couple years have been, hey, we're going to put a lot into it and not get a whole lot back. So that's where I am with this thing right now. You guys have been great in the comment section. I've loved reading all of the thoughts that you have on this. I'm curious to see what moves continue to make. I don't think we're going to have a whole lot of changes being made until after the World Series. Little stuff. Hey, coach here, coach there. But I'm sure there's internal evaluations that are going on as we speak where you're going, you know what? Do we want to pay this guy not to be here? Do we feel comfortable with where this organization's going? And where is this organization going? Are the Cubs really going to be contending with the Phillies and the Dodgers and the Mets and other teams next year for the pennant in the National League and a World Series? And to me, the way that they performed in the one-run games tells me that they're not. Tells me that when they match up against baseball's best pitchers, they're not a good team. And I feel like that is an area where the Cubs have to get better. You got to win those one-run games. Think about the Javi Baez years. Javi and Chris Bryant, those guys, they'd come up with a hit or two. They won some 2-1 games. The Cubs in those games lose 1-0, 2-0, because they just can't get any offense going. So, we'll see how that changes in the offseason as well. But I wouldn't be surprised, and I'll leave it with this, if we don't see, if this front office stays, some blockbuster trades where you get rid of major league guys and you get major league guys back. Maybe the Cubs feel like Javier Assad is expendable. Maybe if you go out and you sign Corbin Burns, you'd be willing to trade a Justin Steele. Yeah, I mean, I'd be tough to do, but maybe you're saying, hey, he's been injured, but when he's healthy, he's really good, but we'll get something valuable back. I'm not talking about prospects. I'm talking about players that are going to slide right in and help your organization. Like baseball used to make a lot of these trades, but we haven't seen them as much lately. But maybe that's, something that we'll see, not prospect for prospects or prospect for star players, but players for players. And to help the Cubs kind of get over the hump, because you don't need any more infielders. You got those guys. Or are the Cubs willing to trade away? I've seen, James Triantos as a guy that they may trade. Is that the direction that you want to go? You want to start trading away your prospects? I don't know. Honestly, I don't know what the answer is, other than that the threshold is here, and I feel like the Cubs are here. I feel like there's a big gap, even despite being over 500. When did you feel like the last 2 years that the Cubs were a team that could win the World Series? There was the right by the trade deadline 2 years ago when they got hot and they started to play very good baseball. That's been really the only time. Beginning of last year, or of this past season, I thought they played really good baseball, but the bullpen couldn't hold on. I think in the back of our minds, we were going, we know these guys are talented, but do they have the star power? And I think that's the theme for me this offseason is I don't think they have the star power. And the closest thing that they have to it are the Pete Crow Armstrongs and the Owen Caseys and the Matt Shaws, and they're not ready to be big league stars yet. They're good players. We kind of saw glimpses of it last year with Pete Crow Armstrong, but they're not star players at the big league level. And Cody Bellinger felt like he took a step back. He felt a little bit old at times last year, had the injuries, and it's a risk if he comes back. If he comes back, it creates a logjam to me. But maybe if he comes back, then you try to talk, maybe it happened to going somewhere else or something where you could kind of work this roster around a little bit. But the bottom line is that the front office, I think, is still evaluating what's going on and who they want. I think if they found the right guy, like if they found the right person to run the organization, I wouldn't be surprised if they made a move. But who is that person? Now, I don't know. Last time they went out and they got Theo Epstein, who was the best person that you could find. I mean, basically the Nick Saban of baseball. I mean, it beat both curses. I mean, no matter what we say about him, he's going to go down as maybe the greatest executive since Branch Rickey. So who's the guy now? I don't know, but we'll see. Thank you guys for hanging out. Again, like and subscribe, get in the comments section, and we will continue to talk. Hey, and don't forget right now, the Tennessee Smokies team store, clearing out, man. The Smokies are becoming a new team. They're moving to Knoxville. They'll still be the Smokies, but they're changing all of their gear. So you guys right now take advantage of a lot of great deals on Tennessee Smokies gear at their team store. Thanks for hanging out, and go Cubs.